Diplomats and officials fear that UK and EU negotiators are too wide apart on the Irish backstop assurances being proposed. By Attorney General Geoffrey Cox, Express.co.uk has learned. Talks will now run into the weekend in a last gasp bid to secure guarantees that enable Mr Cox to reverse his legal advice on the Irish border fix ahead of the meaningful vote next Tuesday. Negotiations on Tuesday night to save the Prime Minister's Brexit deal ended in deadlock after Brussels refused to accept the very reasonable proposals put forward by Mr Cox. One source familiar with the negotiations claimed that the interpretive instrument, which sets out the temporary nature of the backstop proposed by the Attorney General, goes well beyond where Michel Barnier is permitted to go by the EU27. EU27 ambassadors tonight were briefed on the latest state of play in the negotiations by Sabine Weyand, the EU's deputy chief negotiator, who has continued talks with her British counterpart, Olly Robbin. Throughout the day, the German official told senior diplomats that Mr Cox presented the concept of an independent arbitration panel that determines whether both sides are putting in sufficient work to find alternatives to the backstop. But Michel Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator, is said to have voiced concerns and rejected the British proposals because they go beyond the current provisions for the arbitration panel set out in the draft EU withdrawal agreement and run counter to the ECJ jurisdiction set out in the document, according to one EU diplomat. Brexit news: EU leader preparing to write off meaningful vote on Theresa May's deal. Image Getty. In legal advice last year, Mr Cox warned Britain could be trapped indefinitely in a customs union by Brussels if talks to supersede the backstop dragged on beyond 2020. The Attorney General's negotiations now focus on providing fresh guarantees that allow him to claim the mechanism to avoid a hard border on Ireland is on a temporary measure, but his work to agree extra protocols, which can be ratified alongside the Brexit deal, ended in an ill-tempered stalemate after 3.5 hours of talks with Mr Barnier on Tuesday night in Brussels. With the Brexit talks stalled, the EU27 are making the preparations for a blame game, during which MPs criticise the EU for Mrs May's deal being voted down once again. Diplomats are equally concerned that Brussels has been offered little in the way of reassurances from British negotiators that the desired changes to the deal will secure a positive vote next Tuesday. The UK is seeking substantial assurances without any assurance that these will actually work in any way, a source said. EU leaders will not consider reworking mechanisms without first receiving an indication from the UK that this would actually secure the backing of MPs, the source added. Mr Robinson was Weyand will once again hold technical-level talks tomorrow to establish whether continuing negotiations over the weekend will be helpful. There are very sensitive discussions. We're into the meat of the matter now. We have put forward some proposals, very reasonable proposals. We are now into the detail of the discussion, said Mr Cox. Returning to London this morning, both sides have exchanged robust, strong views and we are now facing the real discussions. Talks will be resuming soon. Mr Barnier was downbeat during his weekly briefing to Jean-Claude Juncker and his top team of European commissioners this morning, according to a source. I am still determined, he said, after the meeting.